Like organizations, professions may have a set of professional values. For example, medical doctors take the Hippocratic Oath. They pledge never intentionally to harm one's health. But sometimes a dilemma arises. What if one's life could be saved, extending his life for a year, but at the expense of his family's life savings? The doctor should not hesitate to save the man's life. Consider another case where one's life could be saved but will suffer excruciating pain for the next 3 years. Should the quality of life be considered? Personal values must also be considered. For example, a politician might make a promise, especially during an election, that she later finds that she must break. Despite realizing that conditions have changed requiring her to break a campaign promise, she might not. G.W.H. Bush found himself in such a position. During his campaign for president, he promised no new taxes. He intended to fulfill his promise. However, into his presidency, Bush realized that America would suffer from deficit spending, spending more than the country has, which would have haunted the country for decades. On the one hand, if Bush raises taxes, he would break his promise, and he would probably lose re-election. On the other hand, if he did not raise taxes, he would be economically remiss as president. He raised taxes, broke his promise, lost re-election, but saved Americans from greater debt. A policy itself might express a set of policy values apart from organizational, professional, and personal values. For example, in most states, one cannot be committed to a mental hospital unless he commits himself, in which case he can leave at will. An immediate family member, usually parents or guardian, commits him or the authorities find him to be in danger to himself or others. Simple disturbance of the peace does not justify forced commitment. Certainly such policy often counters the values of the mental health organizations. Personal values. A person might protest, can't he be forced to get help? And professionals such as psychologists and the police. The policy is intended to prevent anyone from haphazardly being committed. But in particular cases, organizations, individuals, and professionals might all agree he should be in a mental hospital. Finally, there are ideological values, such as communism, socialism, fascism, capitalism, communitarianism, pluralism, democratic liberalism, anarchism, etc. These ideologies are neither exhaustive nor exclusive. It is difficult to compare them because each speaks to different social aspects. Capitalism, fascism, communism, and socialism regard economic orders. Most who subscribe to one of these ideologies presuppose economic order is among the most important, if not the most important, social sphere. Democratic liberalism and anarchy regards the political sphere, and communitarianism regards the social sphere. Thus, according to Marx, true communism will be communitarian and anarchic, and the state will wither away. Ideology involves a systematic philosophy which directs social and political order. Most political scientists agree that Americans do not have a defined ideology like their European counterparts. John Kingdom notes that Americans focus on specific issues as opposed to philosophical system like communism. Indeed, Alexis de Tocqueville notes that Americans do not like philosophical ideas. There is a dictum that states, "Never let your principles get in the way of doing what is right." Americans like capitalism until it does not work. Americans subscribe to democratic liberalism, democracy with rights, unless it is detrimental. Americans love the rule of law until it fails them. Simply, Americans are pragmatists. We like what works, even if it counters our loose principles. That being said, policymakers must realize that if ideology is ignored, the policy is open to ideological criticism. For example, President Obama's universal health care was criticized as socialistic by some and fascist by others. And indeed, Obamacare has characteristics of both. But Roosevelt's New Deal also had elements of both. Certainly a large minority criticized the New Deal, but the majority of Americans have little problem with Roosevelt's program. Indeed, Social Security is a form of socialism, but most, especially the elderly, look the other way. When members of Congress vote on a policy, a bill, and the President signs or vetoes a bill, they must consider partisan views, their constituency, public opinion, experts' deference, the status quo, decision rule, and scientists. Political officials often encounter a dilemma. They want to pass good policies, but they also want to do what is politically feasible. The American political system at the federal level is somewhat unique in that the most important political element is the constituents, or perhaps special interest. This is very different than most Western European countries, where the party is the most important political element. Members of Congress must be re-elected by their constituents. Certainly, the party is important, but constituents and interest groups are more important. For example, when Phil Gramm was a Democrat representative for a district in Texas in the 1980s, he started to vote with the Republicans. The Democratic Party decided to punish him by removing him from important committees. He responded by resigning his seat, then running for his seat as a Republican in a special election. He won his seat back because his constituents care more that he had their interest in mind than the interest of the party. Unlike members of European parliaments, members of Congress often cross party lines, vote against their own party. Often, constituents do not know how their member votes, especially in a safe district during a non-election year. The party, however, does pay attention how a member votes in Congress. Constituents re-elect the member, but the party grants greater power within the party by placing the member on different committees or offering leadership positions within the party. Members find they must neither upset the constituents, so to be re-elected, nor upset the party to receive greater power, not to mention to receive assistance from the party during the campaign. The ideal situation is where the constituents are perfectly aligned with the party. Consider the following example. Let us say that the Republicans want to cut spending by reducing federal funding for mental hospitals. Congressperson John is a Republican and represents a district which is dominated by Republicans. The district also has a large mental hospital, which provides half the employment in the district. As Republicans, most of the constituents favor cutting social programs. However, they oppose cutting federal funds of mental hospitals because it will lead to the closing of the mental hospital. Does Congressperson John vote with the party and against his constituents? Probably not. First, he wants to be re-elected, and second, he has the personal value to represent his constituents. What is of interest of constituents can either be expressed by the constituents through public opinion. It can be deduced by the congressional staff. That is, there are some issues of which the public is unaware, but the congressperson recognizes that it will affect her constituents. Indeed, the idea of a representative is that of a trustee when the constituents do not voice their opinion. Each year, Congress considers many bills. Because no member could be an expert on every policy area, members serve on committees, such as the Committee on Banking or the Committee on Transportation, where they become experts on the policy area. When a bill is voted on the floor, members often defer to members of a committee. If the committee supports the bills, especially with an overwhelming majority, the member might defer to the committee member. At the state level, committees in the New York Assembly prevent most bills from reaching the floor. That is, in the New York Assembly, the crucial stage of a bill is not the vote on the floor, but the vote at the committee stage. Members might also defer to science and policy analysis conducted by nonprofit think tanks and universities. Finally, some committees follow a rule for deciding which bills pass the committee. That is, the way one bill is considered should be similar to how another bill should be considered. For example, if the Committee on Education considers expected cost, period of implementation, expected improvement to evaluate one bill, that committee should use the same criteria to evaluate similar bills.